All right, students, before we get into our ceramics unit, we are going to take a few notes on vocabulary terms and a little bit of history just so we get a better understanding of ceramics and are using the correct terms while we are working on this unit. When you are taking notes, you do not need to write down everything word for word. You can if you want to, but you do not have to. Kind of pick out the most important words or sections of sentences and write those down in your notes. You will be turning in your notes to Google Classroom, so make sure that you have everything included on these couple of slides. So the first thing that we need to define is clay. This is a very scientific definition, so I'm going to break it down for you just a little bit. It is a compound of decomposed and altered or changed rock. That means that it is found in the earth. Like it says in that last area here, it's an organic matter, okay? It cannot be made by man. It has to be found in the earth. That's the biggest thing that I want you to understand about clay. It is not just dirt either, and you can see here various hydrated silicates. So what that means is it has water in it. It is a wet material. It is not just dry dirt. And you can't necessarily make clay just by adding water to dirt. That would just make mud. It does have the silicates of aluminum. So a specific material is within clay that makes it able to be turned into a ceramic object. Okay, you can't just turn any dirt on the ground into a ceramic object. It has to be clay specifically. There's a couple different types of clay. Red clay, white clay are the most common ones. We'll be using white clay in our projects. The second term is pottery or ceramics. And those are objects that are shaped from wet clay and then they're hardened by heat. It does not turn into a ceramic object until it is hardened by heat. So technically I have things labeled as clay animal, but by the end, your clay animal is going to turn into a ceramic animal. To harden by heat, we will be using a few things. But first, we'll talk about glaze, and then kiln is how we harden it by heat. But a glaze is a glass-like coating that is placed on the ceramic surface, and it is fused to the surface through heat. It is not paint. Glaze has like sand particles in it because that keeps the pigment from just burning up. So that is a glaze. It is very different from paint. If you were to put a painted animal into the kiln, the paint would just burn off. The glaze helps to make sure that the color or pigment does not just burn away. Okay, and then last two things, they go hand in hand. A kiln is the high temperature furnace that's used to fire pottery. So your clay piece goes in the kiln and then it comes out, it would be called ceramic, a ceramic piece. The kiln gets up to at least 2200 degrees. It gets extremely hot. You don't just put anything in there, it would probably just burn up. But the material or compounds in the clay, make sure that it does not just burn up. The kiln runs for at least 18 to 24 hours from start to finish because it takes so long to get up to that heat level, the temperature, and then it slowly cools itself back down in order to protect your pieces. If you quickly tried to cool it down, which I'm not sure how they would possibly do that, then your pieces could possibly break. Firing is the term that is basically used to describe what happens when the kiln is turned on. It's to heat that clay at those high temperatures in the kiln. Your piece goes through 2 firing cycles. The first one is a bisque fire, and that is turning your hardened clay piece into a less fragile hardened piece. It will be gray when it's dry and it goes into the kiln. When it comes out, it will be more like a creamy white color. The second firing is a glaze firing. So you're going to add glaze to your white clay piece, and then we'll put it in the kiln again, and that will coat and fuse your ceramic piece with the glaze. It will look shiny. The glazes I have are a shiny glaze. I do have a few matte glazes, but most of the ones we will be using are shiny. And that is only through firing that can happen. Lastly, these are really, really short, small snippets about ceramic history, but what I want you to know is ceramics is a very old art. It is probably one of the first arts that we have recorded. And archaeologists can tell a lot about a civilization from the broken piece of pottery that they find around archaeological sites. Most knowledge of ancient civilizations comes from paintings on pottery. The thing is that people were mostly illiterate and did not have a formal education, and they never learned to read or write. But you can understand images and you can tell what's going on through an image. So they would paint those historical facts or information onto pottery, and people would then understand the story or history that is being portrayed. Keep that in mind as you are working on your pieces. Just know this is an old art form, and obviously they didn't have electric kilns back then, but they did have kilns that they would keep a fire going for days at a time to keep it up to the correct heat to get it hot enough to run. And they used it primarily for functional use. So your mugs and plates and bowls, those are all ceramic pieces, and they were commonly used, obviously, since the beginning of time, really, to hold meals and all that stuff. So make sure you completely write down little bits of information from these few slides. And if you have any more questions, feel free to ask.